on this computer. We've got about 20, I think 27 people were registered for this. My last head count, there are 16 of us on here now, and I'm confident that number will grow. But if you've done these before, Jason Phillips, the Simpson County Ag Agent, and I have kind of been putting these together, 3 1-hour sessions on a different piece of either forage or beef cattle production, and hope some of y'all have done these in the past. I know I'm seeing some names that are familiar. Tonight we're going to talk all about genetics. Dr. Bullock is going to talk for 40 or 45 minutes, and then he will answer some questions. And the last 5 minutes, I'll pop up a brief evaluation for everybody to do. You'll be able to scan the QR code with your phone or follow a link, click a link to do for us. Y'all have probably all done this before. If you have any questions between this session and next session, feel free to reach out to your county agent. Simpson County folks, y'all's county agent is at a basketball game, so I'm flying solo trying to make sure all this happens tonight. After we set the date, Jason won some kind of a door prize somewhere and came up with some really good UK basketball tickets tonight. So we'll have to give him grief about skipping our first session. But with that, Doc, I'll turn it over to you and just try to save about 10 minutes at the end for some questions and a little evaluation.
That sounds good. I tell you, okay, it looks like y'all still see my screen, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because the little green box went away, and I just wanted to make sure it was still coming through. All right. Appreciate the invitation, Greg. It's always a pleasure. I'm like you. I can't tell you how many of these late January meetings I have gotten part way or halfway and we canceled and ended up turning back. So I sure appreciate being able to come to you guys live and in person, but sitting in my home office. So we'll go through, and tonight we're going to kind of focus on bull selection, talk a little bit about some heifer selection, and particularly as it pertains to genomics. We're hearing a lot of people at least seem to be interested in that. So I want to at least give you some information to help you make your decisions on. And so going to start off with just with the bull selection side of things, and just as a brief overview, just so you guys don't think I'm just completely caught up in the technology and everything else. Just remind you of some of the things we need to be looking at. First thing on buying a bull is reproductive soundness. We need to make sure that that bull has had a breeding soundness exam or a BSE, so that it doesn't matter how good his genetics are if he can't get your cows bred. So make sure you have a BSE done on the bull. We need to make sure the bull has good structural soundness to get around and be able to breed cows. But also that's a heritable trait, which means he passes it on to his offspring. And particularly if you're keeping back replacement females, the structure of that bull is even more important, because you want to keep those females around in the herd until they're 10, 11, 12 years old. So having good structure is extremely important for them. We still need to take a look at the cattle, at the bulls that we're going to be buying. That's how we evaluate things like muscling, body capacity, a lot of those type traits we do through visual appraisal, as well as the structural soundness. That's how we're able to tell that as well. And then the last thing, and kind of what we're going to focus on tonight, is the performance side. How good are his calves going to be? Because that's really what we're after in the long run, is determining how good a bull's calves are going to be. So that's kind of where we'll focus. Any of you guys that have heard me before know that we talk a lot about, when we talk about bull selection, expected progeny differences, and that's going to kind of be the focus tonight. Might go a little deeper than we have previous, because now we have the genomic side of EPDs that are involved too, and I'll go through and explain kind of what's going on there. Now, even though we're going to be focusing on bull selection and EPDs, I do want to remind you guys it's important for commercial cattlemen to be crossbreeding. We're not going to talk about that tonight, but I want to always remind you guys that crossbreeding is how we need to be managing our cattle, and so think about that when you're selecting that bull too, the breed of bull. So when we start talking about the EPDs, some of the reasons that we want you to be considering EPDs, it is the best tool for selection that we have, and that's for the traits that it's computed on. So and all the time they're coming up with more and more traits that they're giving us information on, and so we want you to be sure and use EPDs when you can, for, like I say, for the traits that we compute them on. It's used to compare bulls. So if you have two bulls you're considering, you can compare their EPDs and tell which, and I'll show you an example of that here in a little bit. But it also, we can look and see how a bull ranks within his breed, which can give us some good information as well. Because if you think about it, when you have if you don't know a lot about a breed, but you know that EPD, say, puts that bull in the top 25% of the breed for that trait, then that's going to tell you that bull is probably pretty good for that particular trait. Now, again, we'll show you an example of that here in just a little bit. The reason EPDs are as effective as they are and that we really promote them is because of all the information that goes into computing that EPD. For an EPD, it uses the actual measurements that were recorded on that bull. So what he weighed, say at birth, at weaning, at yearling time, all of that information gets recorded and sent in and is part of the information that gets computed. The pedigree of that bull comes into the equation as well. And how that helps out is because all of the relatives of that bull, their information actually helps us to determine what that bull's genetic merit is, or his EPDs are as well. The more recent one that we have is genomics, and we'll go into more detail on that in a little bit. But the big thing about EPDs is they take out any management or environmental differences between bulls. So in other words, if a bull got special treatment, EPDs recognize that and account for that, and we don't base the better bulls because they were treated better. It is truly because they have better genetics for those particular traits. We need to remember that EPDs are a risk management tool, and all that means is they're not perfect. There's going to be some times that you're going to use EPDs and you're going to think you're getting a calving ease bull, and you may have to pull some calves. You're going to think you have a high growth bull, and the calves don't grow as well as you would have liked. It's not a perfect science. We can make mistakes. So what we're trying to do is try and improve the accuracy as much as we can on those EPDs, because the higher the accuracy is, the lower that risk is that we can make a mistake. And so we'll look at ways to improve the accuracy on those EPDs. So just as a refresher on how they work, we have these two bulls that we're considering to buy, and we're interested. We sell our calves at weaning, so we're interested in what kind of weaning weight we're going to get out of the calves. So the bull on the left has a plus 40 weaning weight EPD. The bull on the right has a plus 28 EPD, weaning weight EPD. So what these numbers tell us is if we were to breed these two bulls to an equal set of cows, equal environment, equal management, all things are the same, and we raise the calves up to weaning time and weigh them, the bull on the left's calves are going to weigh about 12 more pounds on average compared to the calves produced by the bull on the right. And so if you're looking for more growth, the bull on the left should give you more growth in the calves to weaning time. Now, if we looked up and determined how those bulls ranked within their breed, the bull on the left, that 40 put him in the top 20 percentile of the breed for weaning weight. So we know Charolais is a high growth breed to start with, and this bull is in the top 20%. That's going to tell us that bull should be should give us some really growthy calves. The bull on the right, however, was in the top 65 percentile. So he's actually below average for weaning weight within the breed. And so depending on what your needs are, I'm not saying but if you're wanting to put increased weight on, the bull on the left would be the bull of choice. So a trait like milk, so traits like weaning weight growth, those are what we call direct. And so those are traits that we see immediately in the next generation. But we also have what we call maternal traits, and milk is a good example of a maternal trait. So for the maternal trait, since obviously the bull can't milk, we can't we have to measure his milking ability through his daughters. And so when you think about milk, it's an extra generation down the line. So the bull on the left, this Angus bull, has a milk EPD of 33 pounds. The bull on the right has a milk EPD of 25 pounds. That's not pounds of milk. It's pounds of weaned calf. And okay, so stick with me here. So what those numbers tell us basically is if we were to breed those two bulls, once again, equal cows, equal management, everything's the same, and we take some heifers produced by that mating, raise the heifers, breed them to equal bulls under equal management. The bull on the left, his daughters will raise calves that weigh about 8 more pounds at weaning time compared to the calves raised by the bull on the right's daughters. Okay, so maternal traits, we only consider them if we're keeping back replacement heifers. If you're selling everything, then you don't need to worry about the maternal traits. You can focus just on what we call those direct traits. Again, when you look at the percentiles, the bull on the left, that 33 puts him in the top 10% of the breed for milking ability. So really what we might consider a little bit on the extreme side for milk, whereas the bull on the right is an average milker. And so once again, I won't get into a debate as to which of these bulls is necessarily better, but I'll give you something to think about. And I'll give you an example of that here in just a second. So how do we properly use EPDs? Well, one is that we need to focus on economically relevant traits. In other words, I try and encourage beef producers to think about traits that can either put money in your pocket or possibly take money out of your pocket. All right. An example of taking money out of your pocket would be things like calving ease, in other words, or lack of calving ease. If you don't get a good enough calving ease bull, you have to pull calves or lose a heifer because she couldn't have a calf. That's taking money out of your pocket. Traits that put money in your pocket, once again, if you're selling calves at weaning time, then weaning weight growth is something that can put additional pounds on those calves that you're going to sell, and that's putting money in your pocket. So concentrate on the traits that either put money in or take money out of your pocket. Another way to think about these traits is sometimes you have options. And a good example of that is if we're trying to find a calving ease bull, some folks look at the calving ease direct, but we still have a lot of people looking at the birth weight EPD. Well, I'm going to try and convince you guys that calving ease direct is the actual economically relevant trait. A lot of people use birth weight because at one point in time, 20 years ago, that's all we had. There wasn't a calving ease direct EPD. And so that was the best we had to be able to predict if a bull was going to be easy calving or not. But more recently, we now have this calving ease direct EPD, which is a better indicator of whether we are truly going to get calving ease from that bull or not. And so the better is to use the calving ease direct. Another mistake is when people also take into consideration the actual measurement. So they look at the actual birth weight of that bull to help with their decision. The single best way to find a calving ease bull is to look at calving ease direct alone without any other information. I'll hear a lot of times people will say, well, you got to avoid those big headed or broad shouldered bulls. Once again, there's been lots of research done, and if you will focus on the calving ease direct alone, it is your best indicator. We also need to be careful of extremes. We need to match our genetics to our management that we're putting in. So in other words, if you're kind of a low input kind of an operation, then you probably need to avoid those extreme bulls from a growth or milking standpoint. So when we think about matching our genetics to our environment, so we need to think about what our resources are. The first is labor. And I've got a picture here that a lot of people, think is a bad thing. All right. We have a guy that's here pulling a calf. And if you were to ask you, I bet you most of you would say that's a bad thing. I say that's a good thing. And here's my reason. If this guy wasn't there to pull that calf, what's the result? Result is that you probably have a dead heifer. And so now, yes, we want to avoid this if we at all can, but but how we need to kind of determine what level of calving ease direct that we need is going to be based on how much time we actually get to spend with our cattle during the calving season, and particularly our heifers. So if you're a part-time farmer, just get to look at the cattle an hour, maybe 2 hours a day during calving season, and you're breeding this bull to some heifers, you better make sure you have adequate calving ease direct, or else you're going to end up finding a dead heifer with the calf halfway out at some point in time. So, but if you're breeding, if you're around the cattle a good bit and you're breeding all cows, then it might not be, you might can relax that standard just a little bit in that case. The other is nutritional quality and quantity, how much nutrition you have. And this is going to affect things like how much productivity you want in your cattle, particularly if you're keeping back replacement heifers. Because if you're shooting for extremely high growth and high milk, that's a lot of added stress on that cow and actually nutrient demands. And so back to that question I asked you before, said we weren't going to get into right away, was which of these two bulls is better? Well, it kind of depends, doesn't it? It depends on what situation you're going to put them in. If you're talking about this situation where you have extremely good forages, lots of growth, lots of good adequate forage, then of course that bull with the heavier milking EPD, his daughters would probably flourish well in that kind of an environment. But if you're out here where it takes 100 acres to sustain a cow, I'm going to say you don't want those cows having a whole lot of milk in them. And so you'd have to be more cautious. The bull with lighter milk might be a better situation. And so you kind of have to determine what your situation is, what's right for you in terms of the level of production that you can get out of the management that you put into your operation. So the last thing is we need to be aware of some of the correlations and monitor other traits. And the big one and we'll talk more about it here later on, is mature weight. When we're trying to really push the growth on our calves, and so we buy those bulls that have really high yearling weight or weaning weight EPDs, and we keep back daughters. The result, if we're not careful, is those daughters, when they're mature cows, weigh more. And so we have to be aware, if they weigh more but produce more, that's okay. But if they weigh more and you guys don't take advantage or take good care of them and give them more feed to take care of that added weight, then what happens is they can lose some condition. And if they lose condition, they have a harder time getting pregnant. And so we have to monitor that and make sure we don't go too far to extremes. So the example I showed you earlier, a lot of breeders, seed stock breeders today are when they put their sales catalog together, are giving us what the percentile rank of the EPDs are for the different traits. But they don't always do that. And if they don't, or you're looking at the bulls and you have the EPDs, but you don't have the percentile rank, I just want to show you how to use those charts. And you can get the chart for most any of the breeds. If you go to the breed, go to the website for that breed, and do a search for EPD percentile tables, you can find it for most breeds. And so once you do, this is how you would use it. This is for a Simmental bull. This is a Simmental bull. He's got a calving ease of 14. And unless you have been buying Simmental bulls or a Simmental breeder, you might not have a clue what a calving ease 14 value is. And this will help you out. So what you do is you find the column for calving ease. You come down until you find where 14 is, and it's actually between those two numbers. So you come out, and so what that tells us is that bull is in the top 10 to 15% of the breed for calving ease within the Simmental breed. Okay, so that's telling us that should be a pretty calving ease bull, the fact that he's in the top of the breed for calving ease. We can do it for any other trait. Yearling weight, if you're interested in yearling weight, find the yearling weight column. come down to where that number is. So right there, 104 is between those two numbers. So again, this bull is he's in the top 25 to 30% of the Simmental breed for growth. And so that's as simple as it is for using these tables. This is probably one of the most underutilized best tools that's available to cattlemen. Anytime you go to buy a bull, I highly encourage you to find out, if the breeder doesn't give it to you, to find out your EPD, the percentile ranking, to give you a better idea of whether that bull is adequate for the traits that are important to you. So now genomics. Let's think about genomics a little bit and get into that. We're hearing a lot more discussion of it, and most of you probably know, but not sure what y'all's Cape, if y'all have a lot of Cape money down there or not. But the Cape bull buying program does require genomics for bulls being bought into it now, and so all bulls have to have what we call genomically enhanced EPDs. So if you're going to buy bulls through that program, be aware of that new requirement. It's been in place, I think, for 2 years now. So we're going to get into genomics then and talk about that. And really why we are interested in genomics is because of what it does for accuracy. Remember, I told you the higher the accuracy of an EPD, the lower the risk is for that value being wrong and causing you to make a mistake. And so if we can get that accuracy value higher, that gives us more confidence that that bull's EPDs are correct and that bull is going to give us what we expect him to give us for those traits. So how we look or how we get higher accuracy, there's a few different ways. The first is the seed stock producer needs to turn in the data on that bull and all of that bull's ancestors and really the whole herd. We encourage seed stock producers to turn in the data on their entire herd for every trait that they can possibly collect the data on. The more data that goes in, the better off the EPDs are going to be. Sorry, guys, I made the mistake of buying a gaming headset. And so if nobody talks to me for a period of time, it shuts off and I hear a little beep and I have to turn it back on. So you guys can hear me okay now, Greg? Am I back on? Okay, good deal.
Yeah, you're back on.
All right. So, all right. So the other thing is, and once again, for you commercial guys, you don't need to worry about this, but there are some contemporary grouping strategies that a seed stock producer can do. The more females that he has in a contemporary group to raise the calves, it helps out the accuracy a little bit. But the big one we're going to talk about is genomics. If we can get our seed stock producers to send in genomic information and get these genomically enhanced EPDs, that's where we really greatly improve the accuracy of those bulls. And I'll show you how much here in a little bit. But behind the scenes, what you guys don't see is the reason these genomics help out is because of what we call, it improves the pedigree and it improves the progeny. And what I'm going to show that I hope will convince you here in a little bit is this progeny equivalence of why it's important. All right, so here's going to be my example. This is actually a picture of me and my 4 brothers a few years ago. I'll just put it that way. Probably, I'm going to guess about 1969. And if you're wondering which one is me, I'm the good-looking one. And if you're still having trouble, I'm the middle son. And so that's me right there in the middle, and that explains a lot, being the middle son, I guess. But what I want to do is kind of the reason that we have that genomics is important on the cattle side of thing is because of improved parentage or accuracy of parentage and accuracy of relationships, or how well we can tell how related animals are to each other. Okay. And so this is exactly how it works in cattle, but I'm going to kind of give you a human example of that as well. And so I don't know if any of you guys have done it, but I had the genomics test done. You know, they have the ancestry.com, all those. There's a ton of different websites out there where you can basically send those guys your DNA, and that's for the most part, spitting in a tube or taking a cotton swab and swabbing the cheeks and sending that in. And you send those folks very little information when you send that sample in. You basically send them your email address, a check, and your DNA. And you don't send them and tell them who your relatives are. But the neat thing is they send back and tell you who your relatives are. Okay. And so here's an example of that. So I had this test done. My father was the first to have it done. My father had the test done. I had the test done. And then my son asked if he could have it done. So all three of us have had a DNA test done. And when I was looking through it one day, I pulled this page up on the internet, on my account, and I had never really thought through this whole process before. And I looked up here and I saw parent child, and I looked over to the right and I saw that my dad's name was there. And that was a very, very fortunate thing, because there are people that do these tests and they pull this page up and that is not their father that's over there. They find out their brother was not their brother, or he's just a half brother. Those things happen, believe it or not. And so here was my dilemma. Once I read that and I saw, well, thank goodness, yes, my father is my father. The next thought that occurred to me is, well, you better make sure your son is your son. And fortunately, guys, that is my son. And I have not found anyone else that's ever popped up there that was my child. Thank goodness. So, I just want to warn you guys, I think it's neat to do these tests, but always be aware of the possibilities of what might happen. How I can relate this to cattle is the same thing happens in cattle. There are mistakes that are made all the time in identifying what bull actually sired a calf. And those problems come a lot of times with AI. When they look at the straw, the straw of semen, they write a number down wrong, or somebody writes it on the wrong line, or whatever else. Bulls jump the fence and breed cows sometimes that they don't know which bull bred them. So mistakes happen, and when they do, it really screws up the EPDs on that bull. If we don't have the parentage right, it can really screw things up. And so with a genomics test, that's the first thing that happens, is at least we get the parentage correct. All right. The other thing it does is, and as I told you, it improved what we call relationships. All right. And so you guys have probably always heard, and this part is absolutely true, that you got half your genetics from your mother and half your genetics from your father. And that is absolutely true. No matter what your mom or dad told you, they didn't give you more than the other. It doesn't matter which one you look more like. You got 50% of your genes from your mom and 50% from your dad. Now, the other thing you may have heard is that you can carry that one generation further, and that you have 25% of your genes from each of your grandparents. Well, that's just an average. That's not a hard number, the 25%. Same thing. Brothers and sisters, we say that on average, they are 50% related, but that's not an exact number either. That can vary side to side. In the extreme case, and now this is probably even rarer than winning the $500 million lottery, but you could technically not be related to one of your siblings. You could have got all your genes, basically all the chromosomes from one parent, the opposite ones that he got, and vice versa from the mom. And so technically, even though it's like 1 in a gazillion, it could happen. But I want to show you here's something that's more typical. And this is, once again, look at the genealogy that that my son and my dad and I did. And so what this is telling us is it's showing us the relationship between me and my dad, and that's these blue lines. And so that's what I was telling you guys. I got a full chromosome. So these are the different chromosomes over here. So the fact that I got a full blue slate on every one of them, I got a full chromosome of genes from my dad for all 23 chromosomes. Okay. Now, My son, though, this is showing how much of my dad's chromosomes he got, okay, or how many genes on each chromosome he got. And so you can see that on chromosomes 4 and 5, my son didn't get any of the genetics from my dad. There's no red whatsoever on these 4 and 5. So he got on those chromosomes, he got the full chromosome of my mom's genes on 4 and 5. But you can see down here on 9 and 10, on 9, he got a full chromosome of genes from my dad. And on 10, he got almost a full chromosome of genes from my dad as well, just a little piece of my mom's genetics on chromosome 10. And so I don't know what the percentages are of my son. It's probably when you look through our and have the other the rest of the 23 chromosomes there, he's probably going to hit pretty close to that 25 percentile, and that's usually what it ends up, but it could be above or below that. And here I'll show you an example in cattle that a friend of mine, Steve Miller with the American Angus Association, did. He looked within their breed at 6 full sibs. So he had 6 full sibs that we had genomic information on. So full sibs, would expect them to be related at 50%, right? Because of inbreeding, because there was some inbreeding in these bulls, we would expect their relationship to actually be a little higher. We would expect on average their relationship to be 0.59 or 59%. And so when they went through and they looked at every pair, so they looked at each set of brothers and they looked at how they were actually related, the 2 bulls that were the least related, even though we expect them to be 59% related, they were only 49% related. And the 2 bulls that were the highest relationship, they were actually higher than the 0.59. They were related at 65%. And so these seem like very minor, small numbers, but when it comes to computing EPDs and getting information out of the pedigree, this becomes extremely important and actually greatly improves our ability to predict an EPD. And this is that progeny equivalence table I was telling you about, and this is where the rubber sort of hits the road. So don't worry about all of these numbers. I'm just going to go through a couple examples. But for example, within the American Angus Association, what this number tells us is, so if we were to do a genomics test on a bull the day he's born, so the day that bull is born, we send in a hair sample and get a genomic EPD on that bull. It's going to have the same amount of accuracy. If we do nothing else, we just take that hair sample, send it in, get a genomic EPD, it's going to give us the same level of accuracy or the same amount of information if we waited until that bull was able to breed cows, bred enough cows so that they had 28 calves, and that we took a calving ease measurement on those 28 calves, sent it in and got an EPD. And so this saves us tons of time and a lot of effort to not wait till that bull's over a year of age. He's basically 2 years old before we'll get the same level of EPD that we get from just sending in that genomic sample. So that's the earliest. So think about a trait like milking ability, where we really don't know a bull's milking ability until his daughters have raised calves. And so we get the same amount of information by sending in a hair sample on that bull as if we waited about 4 to 5 years until he had 33 daughters raising calves to weaning time. And so it's a tremendous amount of information that we can get early on. And so for you seed stock guys, you can make much better decisions on which bulls to save back for your own use and to sell, which ones need to be culled much sooner than waiting to collect a lot of information on those bulls. So I want to go through real quick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I get a lot of questions about these new commercial heifer tests, the genomics test for them. And I hope you guys understand, I'm very enthusiastic about the genomics test for bulls and seed stock. On the seed stock side of things, I think it's great. I think genomically enhanced EPDs are very much worth the added cost that it takes to get them. On the heifer side of things, the commercial heifers, I have a little different opinion. So does the technology work? Yes, it does. It's the same technology as we use on the bulls. So the technology is solid and it works. They do a good job of using what we call selection indexes. And that's, in other words, weighting each of the traits based on economics and giving you one number to help you select these heifers based on. The problem is the better of these tests require that the calves are 75% Angus. And if you've ever heard me give my crossbreeding talk, you will know that I recommend we never keep a heifer back that's 75% or more of any one breed. And so to me, even though these tests might be good, I'm not advising you to keep back those kind of heifers that are eligible for this test. The test that can be used across all the breeds is not as good a test. It's not as effective on the results. But here's the big part. This is the question that you guys need to ask yourself about any practice anybody ever tells you you need to be doing. If your feed salesman tells you you need to be doing a certain thing or given a certain product, you need to make the determination, does it pay for itself? If you pay $30 for it, are you going to at least get $31 back? So here's the thing we have to remember. You have to test all of your females just to get the information to choose that 10 or 15% that we typically keep back in a particular year. So your cost is not just on the 10 or 15% that you want to keep. It has to apply across all the heifers, and these tests are in the $30 range. In order for it to work, if you retain ownership, in other words, if you keep back those heifers, if you do the test, you keep back the heifers based on that test, in order for them to really stand a decent chance of paying for themselves, you really have to retain ownership all the way through to the rail and get and sell those cattle on a high quality type of a grid. If you're selling your calves at weaning or backgrounding, I don't think there's any way that that test pays for itself. And so just be cautious. And this, as the technology gets better and the cost of these tests comes down, we're going to get to the point where they are going to be a very useful tool. I just don't think we've quite got there yet. How I would think we need to be thinking about it is how much better of a bull can we buy if we took that money we would have invested in these genomic tests for these commercial heifers and just buy a better bull to produce those heifers to start with. I think that's probably a better use of our dollars at this point in time. So my recommendation for heifer selection is, number one, make sure we crossbreed, buy a high quality bull that's going to fit, that has the genetics that are going to fit your management and environment. At weaning, eliminate any heifers that have structural problems, that are light muscled or low body capacity. And then at yearling time, what you need to be doing is selecting those older heifers that have a better chance of getting pregnant early in that first breeding season. The earlier they get bred in that first breeding season, the more time they have to get bred that second calving season. And that's when we usually lose heifers, is trying to get them pregnant that second time. And so keeping back those older heifers that have the good structure and good qualities, I think is going to give us a better shot at getting that done. And then we need to develop them correctly, both up to breeding time and beyond. The other mistake I think we often make is, after a heifer has had her calf, we often treat her like a cow then. We might give her special treatment up to calving, but once she calves, a lot of times we dump her out with the rest of the cow herd. She still needs a little additional help up through that second breeding season. So I would encourage you, if nothing else, try and give them a little special extra attention, a little more nutrition going up through that second breeding season, and I think it's going to help you in the long run. So some practical guidelines to bull selection. First, you need to know when and how you're going to market. If you're, are you selling at weaning time? Are you backgrounding? Are you selling carcasses? We need to know what our marketing strategy is to help us buy that bull. We need to know what our labor and nutritional limitations are and be aware of that so that we don't get in calving difficulty troubles from a labor standpoint, or we don't get overproductive females that we don't provide enough nutrition to. So let's be sure and keep those things in mind. We need to look at other factors. Disposition is one. We always need to make sure that the bull has good disposition. A lot of us have color preferences that we want to be concerned about, whether or not they're horned or polled. These are all considerations when you go to buy that bull. Another big consideration is, are you going to keep back heifers from that bull? If you are, then we have to look at more traits. We now have to look at those maternal traits as well. So some of the different traits we deal with, here's calving ease direct EPD. That's the one that we use to tell if the bull is a calving ease bull. All right. We also have this one down here, the calving ease maternal EPD. But a calving ease maternal EPD tells us if his daughters should be easy calvers. So calving ease direct tells us about him. Calving ease maternal tells us about his daughters. How much emphasis we need to pay to calving ease depends on how many heifers we're going to be breeding that bull to and how much time we spend with the females. Growth, when we think about growth, we need to, once again, that's where that marketing comes in. When do you sell your calves? If you sell at weaning time, then the weaning weight EPD needs to be the growth EPD that you look at. If you background, then the yearling weight EPD is the one you need to pay the most attention to. And if you sell carcasses or sell them or take them all the way through the feedlot, then the carcass weight EPD is the one of importance. We need to also be aware, though, that the more growth we put in our calves, so in other words, if you're selecting bulls with extremely high growth and you're keeping back his daughters, these two things are going to be affected as well. Our cows are going to get bigger, and calving ease is probably going to go down unless we keep a close eye on those. So we have to, particularly if you're selecting for really high growth, make sure that you're not going crazy on the mature size thing and that you're not giving too much on the calving ease side of things. So other traits, milk, we've already kind of talked about that, so I'm not going to put any time there. Some of the reproduction traits, most producers aren't paying a whole lot of attention to these, but I think we should be because of the economic importance of reproduction. It's one of our most economically important traits. And so you might start putting some effort into putting some selection pressure on trying to improve the reproduction in your herd. And these are the EPDs that do that. Most of the breeds have what we call a heifer pregnancy EPD. High values there means that bull's daughters stand a better chance of getting pregnant as heifers. Stayability and sustained cow fertility, that's kind of a longevity EPD. The breeds that give us those traits, it means those cows are likely going to stay in the herd for a longer period of time, which means they are likely going to be having a calf every year. Only one breed has this Preg 30 that I'm aware of, and that's Gelvy, but I think it's a really good EPD. I hope some of the other breeds pick it up. That tells us bulls with high Preg 30 values, it means that a high percentage of their daughters are still pregnant at 30 months of age. That's with the second calf, okay? That means they had their first calf, and now they've gotten pregnant and they're pregnant with that second calf. And like I said before, we lose most of our females in our herd due to reproductive failure because we can't get them bred that second time. Mature weight, I want to discuss that a little bit more. That's another trait that I don't think we've been paying enough attention to that we need to focus on. And that's kind of my latest pet peeve. I have a lot of pet peeves. I can be irritable sometimes, but this is my latest pet peeve. I think when we talk about mature size, that scientists and beef producers think of it differently. And I think we've had a communication problem here. When scientists talk about mature size, we're thinking from a mature weight standpoint. And I think most beef producers are looking at it from a frame size standpoint, what you can see. She looks big and there's a difference, and I'm going to go through why it's different. In most cases, when the scientists and beef producers don't agree, I'm going to side with the beef producer. This is one case where I'm going to go on the side of the scientist, because we feed weight, not scale or size. Okay. And so that's why we need to be really paying attention more to mature weight. Frame size has historically been used to estimate how much we think a cow is going to weigh at maturity. We can take her hip height early in life and have a projection of how big she's going to get. But the data that was used to calculate that is from the 60s. And any of you that were around in the 60s know that cattle do not look today like they did in the 60s. So here's kind of to emphasize what I'm talking about. So within the American Angus Association, this is the genetic trend for yearling height. And for those guys, and I can remember this, the 70s and 80s, that's when we were in a basically all out effort to increase frame size in cattle. And so that was the primary selection tool of most breeders, was to improve frame size. And you can see that we increased the height of calves tremendously. But all of a sudden we started hearing that we're getting our cattle too big. And so when producers decided to put a stop to that, it's pretty amazing how that line all of a sudden went a flat line in terms of stopping that frame size war and stopped getting them taller. We did an extremely good job of that. Okay. So when you look at mature height, it follows closely, but not exactly, right? Same thing. We were increasing it greatly out to the late 80s. Then we put the brakes on, and at least it's somewhat leveled out beyond that. So if the frame score deal still worked, then when I show you the mature weight slide next, it should mirror this slide. And I want you to tell me if you think that mirrors it. It does not. With frame size, with mature weight, we are still on a steady increase up. We're continuing to get them bigger and bigger and bigger. And this scares me, the fact that we haven't put the brakes on at all for mature weight. And the reason this is important is this. We have these two choices, mature height and mature weight, and so this is frame size. That's what we look at, guys. But what you feed is mature weight. So be aware of how big your cows are and feed them appropriately. If you don't, they're going to lose body condition, and then they are going to lose reproduction. So we have to be careful about that.
About 5 minutes, sir.
We're perfect. I think we're right on it. All right. So for the rest of the traits that we have the carcass traits. If you have a way of getting paid for carcass traits, in other words, if you sell on the rail or have a freezer beef program, then these EPDs can help you to find the traits that you want as well. We still need to pay attention to things like disposition. We have both an EPD, it's called docility. Higher values means that bull's calves should be easier tempered, but we still need to make sure that bull itself isn't crazy. And so have some interaction with the bull to make sure he's not crazy as well. Scrotal circumference. This is the only time you will ever hear me say this. If you're a commercial cattleman, actual measurement is what you need to use. And the reason is, remember, an EPD tells us what that bull's progeny are going to do. So if you buy a bull with a high scrotal circumference EPD, it means his calves are going to have large scrotal circumference. If you're a commercial guy, you're going to be castrating, so that's not important. So the seed stock guys need to focus on scrotal circumference EPD, but commercial guys, you need to look at the actual measurement of the bull you're buying. Whoop. And then again, if you're interested in keeping them black or keeping them polled, you need to look for the term homozygous. If you have a homozygous polled bull, you shouldn't have any horned calves. They may be scurred, but they shouldn't be horned. Same thing with black. If you have homozygous black, you should have all black calves, unless you have some Charolais breeding and you might get the smokes. All right, so your take-home message tonight, guys, EPDs are the best tool we have to select for the traits that we have EPDs on. Genomics are a great tool. We need to be getting our seed stock guys to get on board here. get the bulls genomically tested so that we get genomically enhanced EPDs. It greatly improves the accuracy and reduces the risk to our commercial cattlemen. Make sure that any technology that you want to use pays for itself. Just because it works doesn't mean we should be doing it. It has to pay for itself. And remember that big cows eat more. If we do all those things, I think we'll be in pretty good shape. Greg, I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
All right, folks, unmute your microphone if you would, if you have a question for Dr. Bullock. We'll take a couple of minutes here to answer questions. And while he's doing that, or while he's answering any questions that might pop up, I'm going to put the evaluation slide.
You want me to unshare?
I think I can turn it off. Yes, I can.
Okay.
All right, y'all should see a QR code and a link on your machines. If you'll take your phone's camera and point at the QR code, that'll lead you to the evaluation, or you can click it, click that link. I hope you can see that. Can you see that, Doc?
I can.
All right, so everybody else should. You talked a little bit about the genomic testing being part of CAPE. What percentage of bulls in Kentucky do you think are having the genomic testing done on them? We're seeing some animals here in Butler County. I think that's picking up.
It's definitely picking up, Greg, and I think it's probably one of those logistic things. Almost all of the bigger seed stock breeders in the state are doing it now. So I'm going to guess that we're probably up to about 50% of the bulls are probably getting there. And I think because of CAPE that in the next 2 years to 3 years, I think it's going to be up closer to 100%. Same thing with back when we first implemented CAPE, the bull cost share program, and required EPDs. We went from less than half of the bulls in the state having EPDs to every bull in the state basically having EPDs because of the program.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, folks, what other questions have you got out there?
Greg, I got a question about the genomic testing. This is Shane.
Hey, Shane, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I appreciated your comments about the genomic testing as far as the commercial heifers. And I guess I wanted to just take that one step further and ask, we've kind of been evaluating maybe doing some of our balancer cattle, as selling them, market them as commercial heifers. Would you still have the same thought line there about those not being ready yet or not being as much value, I guess?
So we're talking about a little bit of two different things now, and I got in this discussion. I gave a similar talk at Fayette County last night, and we got into a little bit of this discussion because I know that a lot of these bred heifer sales and all are starting to entertain the possibility of implementing genomic testing, for those programs.
Yes, sir.
And it's a little different when we're keeping our own heifers back. We have some insider knowledge, right? We know that we bought the right bull. We know that basically all of these heifers are likely from the same bull. And so getting a genomics test, we don't have to prove anything to ourselves. Like I say, so the value is less. It's a little bit different if you're talking about selling something, because now you have to kind of show your buyers that, okay, this is what you're probably going to be getting. Now you can show them the service sire and everything else, but and I hate to say this, but it is a bit of a marketing tool as far as I'm concerned. To me, he would probably be better off just knowing what the service sire of those heifers are that he's considering buying and make the decision based on that. But a lot of people, that's not how they function. And the reason it's gotten kind of popular, as I understand it, is that at some of these bred heifer sales, there have been some breeders that have done the genomics test and their calves brought top dollar. So people were willing to pay for it. And so do I fault the guy for getting the genomics test and getting more money? Heck no. I mean, that's now, do I think the person that bought those got that added value that they paid for them? Probably not. And so it's a questionable thing. I don't think that you're necessarily doing your customers big favors in doing it, Shane, but if you have customers that are asking for the information and you can pass on that cost, then I don't see anything wrong with it. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
But you also always have to remember that, yes, it's going to identify your better heifers, but it's also going to identify the inferior heifers too. And that's, a lot of people don't think about that when they go into this. Is it's going to help market the top half, but it's probably going to be harder for them to then market that lower half.
So that brings on one more question then, I guess, after I listened there, and I haven't done any yet, so I'm in the dark here, but you don't think there's any, as far as selecting heifers out of our own group, you don't think it makes decisions easier?
It absolutely does. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
The technology works. I am completely confident that if you do your own heifers and you send in the data and you get it back and you make your selection decisions based on that you can do a better job of selecting. What I can't tell you is if you do, 20 heifers and that costs you $600 and you keep 5 of those heifers, I can't, the best heifers, I can't assure you that those 5 heifers are going to make you $600 more in their future. See what I'm saying? It's not a matter of it not working.
Yes, sir.
It's a matter of
Yes,
I'm
sir.
not convinced that it pays for itself yet.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Other questions that's out there? Everybody must still have something on their mind. We're all still on the call. There's still 25 of us on here.
Hey, Greg.
Yes.
Somebody's wanting you to put that link in the chat if you would.
Yeah, I saw that, and I'll just have to email it to her because I don't know how to do that. Yeah. But thank you for pointing it out. We'll stay on here about 2 more minutes. I will remind you, we will do another program, same time, same channel next week. I believe it's Dr. Van Valen's going to be talking about nutrition and feeding. So please do your evaluation and
I bet you she's going to tell you guys to feed based on the weight of those cows too. You wait and see.
I bet.
Hey, Greg.
Yes.
Greg, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I found this very interesting, but I find that the EPDs doesn't lie, and I think, in my opinion, that the genomic testing is very worthwhile. I've been doing it for a number of years. I started doing it years ago with Kenneth Lowe up at Ocala. That's where I got started from some information from him, and I use lots of his bulls on my commercial cows, and I sell lots of commercial heifers bred. And you can take that genomics, your testing, and you certainly can pick some good heifers if a person will let you pick based on that genetic information.
Yep, I appreciate it, Wayne, and yeah, like I said, I'm not questioning the ease of it or the effectiveness of it at all. It's, to me, it's strictly a return on investment.
Well,
on that,
I've looked at the return on investment. There's one thing, that you mentioned that I don't believe in, is using tail hairs. You can get some contamination, and
Sure.
you can get some other devices to take your samples where you don't have any cross contamination on that. And most of your breeders, up to date, purebred breeders of Black Angus are using other methods, and
Yep.
they got a little
Yep.
vial, and
Yep.
that's what we use on it. And there's a lot of interest in that throughout the state of Kentucky and Virginia, and especially in Missouri, for commercial herds out there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's 3 different ways we can do it. You can do a tissue sample, and that's what you're talking about. They even have
Yes.
special little devices, and I was just giving an example, but yeah, you can do that. You can do still the blood spatter. You can still do the hair, and I agree with you. You have to be much more careful with the hair. There's folks that absolutely can do a good job with the hair and not get the contamination, but that's probably the one you have to be the most careful with.
Yes. But I
have a question.
appreciate your time tonight and enjoyed your comments.
Thank you, sir.
Okay,
I
I
have a-
heard another question. Go ahead.
Sorry, I had a question about the tail hairs. I pull tail hairs quite a bit for my foals. I do hundreds a year. And I saw that you had the option, our vet, he pulls blood every time, but I saw the option of pulling tail hairs. And I was just wondering if that was just as effective, because I'd much rather pull tail hairs just because that's what I'm used to.
Right. Well, and once again, and this should have made this comment earlier, but for the seed stock guys, it's absolutely critical to find out what the breed association accepts, and because they don't all accept all the different methods, and so the first thing to do would be contact the breed association to find out what is acceptable. And a lot of them, you get the supplies from them, whether it's the cards to put the tail hair or the blood or to get the vials and all that. So I hate to say it, Laura, but it depends on the breed as to whether it's acceptable or not. But
It's Angus, and they take all 3 from what I understand.
I think
So,
that's correct. I think
okay.
that's correct. But yeah, and usually I still highly recommend that folks make sure that they, that the breed association that you're on board, and that's where the data goes in through to get the genomically enhanced EPDs. Because a lot of people are thinking just because they just need a genomics test, but not just any genomics test isn't going to do it. It has to be the one to where it goes into and getting the genomically enhanced EPDs.
All right. Anybody else got a question? If you think of one, shoot it to your county agent and we'll get it to Doc. Did I hear somebody else?
Yeah, I got a question, Greg.
All right, go ahead.
We've been trying to buy another bull, and my question is, how close is too close? Like, I've got a bull now that say it's bred one way on the top. His grandfather's a certain bull,
Right.
and what we're running into is a lot of the bulls that I like, I've been finding is going to have this be about the same. Is that this breed bull's being grandfather, and the bulls I'm finding is the same grandfather. Is that too
Right.
close?
Well, let me ask you this. Are you commercial or seed stock?
Both.
Okay. On the seed stock side, I really don't have a problem at all with how close they are, because even though you get some reduced performance, if you get, the closer you get, the better your likelihood of having some reduced performance. All right. That's the first thing to be aware of. Now the getting the weird stuff to happen, that usually doesn't happen. It takes really tight breeding to get to a lot of that. Now, if you're commercial, on the commercial side, I guess the first thing I would do is encourage, like I said, the good crossbreeding program. And with that, that should help you eliminate the inbreeding part of it completely. But what I would consider, I mean, any close relationship is going to be some reduction in performance. In other words, if you breed a bull to his daughter, I absolutely wouldn't keep back that replacement. Okay. Sometimes people get in a situation where they need to do that, but never keep back that daughter as a replacement. Now, if it's a grandsire, granddaughter, once again, I would be hard pressed to keep back that mating as well. But any distance beyond that, if you're talking about like a great uncle or something like that, that's not that big a deal, especially if you're on the seed stock side of things.
Okay.
So I know that's a little bit vague, but we can't go through every single possibility.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but you know, it is a good thing to check that out and avoid it to the best of your ability. But if, as long as you're not getting pretty tight, father, daughter, brother, sister, you're in pretty good shape. I mean, and particularly, like I say, on the seed stock side.
Okay.
Much more concerned about it on the, having the crossbreeding and getting rid of it on the commercial side.
All right. All right. Thank you.
You bet.
Greg, I got one more quick question while I can pick Dr. Bullock's brain, if that's all right.
I'm good.
Suits me. Yep.
This is probably a broad question, but looking at these genomics and everything we're seeing, is there a point where the genomic testing is going to eclipse the on-farm records as far as data?
I'm so glad you said that, Shane, because that is a bad misconception. We have to have both. Okay. So and any of you seed stock guys that are still on here, if you're doing genomics testing, it is critical that you still take your phenotypes, your actual measurements, and send those in too, because that's how we continue to improve the technology on the genomics. For one thing, Shane, is that is always under consideration. So they're always updating and modifying these effects that each of the markers has on the different traits. And so not only its importance in the producing the EPDs, now that the genomics at one point in time, it may have a greater influence than all the data combined, but it won't unless we keep sending in the data though as well. So we can't stop on the data. Hate to say.
Very good. Thank you.
I appreciate you asking that, because that's a very important point, and I should have made that point earlier.
All right, folks, we're going to shut it down.
Enjoyed it. This is a great group. I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, thank you for participating. We've got a good group. We'll see y'all back online next week.
All righty. Maybe I'll see y'all down in Southern Kentucky one day.
Yeah. Thanks, Doc.
Take care.
Thank you.